director. Right now it's not me anymore.
Martin in the middle,
Yeah.
and
Everybody a little bit to the right.
Josette,
Like this should be the middle. This should be the middle.
and Josiah.
Middle. Just the middle.
Perfect. Josiah near Martin, please. And Gildas this side, please. Please.
That's great.
And on the other side. Oh,
One of you.
perfect.
And we can.
And just please step in front.
Miss, could you take like a half a step forward and then you follow up? Yeah, perfect. That looks great. All right, you guys, can you start in the middle here? This in the middle, please. Yep, perfect. Thank you.
This hand, please.
To the right, please.
Have fun. And the other middle? Yeah.
And then here, please. Here, please, everyone.
Please look
Yeah,
from the right to the left.
Please to the right. To the right for me. Thank you.
All right, and everybody back to the center, please. Center. Center. Miss. Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everybody,
And now I
this
will.
direction one?
Okay, just one more. Okay.
Can we just have you guys in this direction for us? Okay,
One more time to me, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now just Mati and the cast, please. And the, please stay.
Right, can you take half a step forward?
Forward.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. That's perfect. You too. Looks great, looks great. Could you start with me, please? You start with me? Yep, perfect.
And to the right.
And here?
Work your way over here, please.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
This side.
Can you look at me, please?
Thank you.
Here, please. Hello. One more.
Guys, can I get
Everyone.
guys, can I get one more shot, please? Right, straight, please. Thank you.
And now to me, to me.
And one more to the right.
And one more here. Thank you.
And
And one to the left
To the
side.
left.
Yeah.
See it, please. Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
To the right.
Thank you very much. And just Mati. Hello.
Could you start with me? That would be nice. Perfect. Thank you.
And with
And
me.
to the right, left.
And to me, please. Thank you. And to the right now, but could you please Red?
Yes.
Turn to the right. A little bit turn to the right. And one more time here.
Yeah.
Adding my
Here. Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And now to the
Right,
right.
one more straight, please. One more straight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Also Sie denken, Sie machen
French director Mati Diop has written film history. With her impressive feature film Atlantique, she was the first black female director in the 2019 Cannes competition. Now she is in competition in Berlin with a documentary, a very topical subject that is also important for us. It's about dealing with looted art, in this case, It's art treasures from the kingdom of Dahomey. That's the name of the film, Dahomey. They are being returned from Paris to what is now Benin. They were looted in the 19th century, and now there's a big debate in Benin about how to deal with them. It's a completely different country, the circumstances are different. In this respect, the film very accurately reflects the cultural, political debates.
Okay. I need help with this. Well, good morning, dear members of the press, and welcome to the 74th edition of the Berlinale. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to moderate this conference today. My name is Jacqueline Encia, and I would like to start off by first to present the film team. At the other end of the table, Josea Geji, protagonist, followed by, yes, followed by Habib Ahandesi, also protagonist. Then Mati Diop, director and screenwriter, who won with the first, won the first feature, Atlantique, the Candor Prize in 2019. And last but not least, Gildas Adanou, protagonist and first assistant director. I would like to start off, if you allow me, to ask the first question to open up the conversation. First of all, dear Mati, thank you very much for documenting this very historic moment as a collective memory, not only for the people of Benin, but literally for the entire African continent that shares this similar history. At what stage did you hear about the return of the 26 artifacts to the Republic of Benin, and how easy or difficult was it to get permission to film the entire process?
It's strange to answer in French when the question is English, donc je vais revenir au français.
I'm going to speak French, though.
Pour votre question.
So thank you for your question.
J'ai pris connaissance. En fait, la question de la restitution, elle a toujours été, je pense, vraiment au
The question of returning these looted goods
ma démarche de
has always really been at the heart of what I do as a filmmaker.
Au Sénégal, depuis maintenant.
It's right at the start of the process that I began in Senegal. I've been working on films like these for about 10 years now.
concrète, tangible, matérielle des...
But restitution of works of art in the tangible sense, handed back by France, a former colonial power in Africa. I have to say it took me a very long time to really become fully aware. It took me a long time to really grasp what it really signifies and all the violence that it entails as well.
L'une des raisons pour laquelle je fais du cinéma, c'est pour, je pense...
That's one of the reasons why I am a filmmaker. I want to make things as tangible as possible, to make it possible for people to understand these issues and to feel them, to have an emotional sense of them, as well, a tangible sense, to realize what the colonial period and all its ramifications meant, which is not necessarily a straightforward process. Colonialization, the colonial project, had a very striking goal, which was to cancel out the violence that lies at its heart. And that makes it difficult to become genuinely aware of that violence. I would say that we really need films so that we can enter into a relationship with all of this, to have a real embodied sense of what these issues mean. And when I heard that Emmanuel Macron had announced that he intended to return the cultural goods that had been stolen from Africa, I found it very striking. It was the very first time that I realized that nothing was where it actually ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Malik Berkati, JIMAG de Suisse. Il y a un moment très important dans votre film.
I'm from a Swiss press. So my question is the following. You focus very much on the response of young people and their discussion, the idea of having lost one's culture and seeking to get back to one's identity and rediscover it. And I wanted to ask about these young people. Are they students, well-educated young people who have some cultural baggage, one might even call it? And I wonder whether there was this general feeling amongst young people as well, not amongst the young people who have studied and are thinking in this kind of academic context.
Well,
I lost the thread of your question a little tiny bit towards the end. Perhaps you could put the question once again. So what I was saying was that you have all these young people, and they're the elite. I mean, I don't want to call them the elite, but in a sense they are. And I wonder, you're representative in a sense of young people, but I wonder about the young people who might not have access to university education. Whether those kind of young people responded to the question in the same way, to the issue. Well, it is a very important topic. I would really like to grasp your question. I'd like us to go into this. But one question at a time, please. Unless the rest of you want to answer, I didn't really get the question. Well, yes. I think I understood the question. Let me have a go.
La question de l'éducation au Bénin, la question de l'éducation au Bénin, comme on appelle, tout comme en Afrique, précisément au Bénin, l'accès à l'information ou l'accès à la bonne information.
Now, of course, in Benin, as in the rest of Africa, education is a key issue. Getting your hands on correct information is very important, and the group of young people that you saw represented, on the whole, the entire community of Benin on this issue. And thanks to this discussion and thanks to the initiative that was launched, a lot of us have had enough information. We were properly informed. We had a rough idea since primary school that some goods had been taken, but the information wasn't precise. However, as part of this process, we were told much more precisely about what had been taken. Before, we hadn't been told so that we could forget about it. There's something I would call collective amnesia. We had forgotten about that, and the whole point of this process was to become connected once again to our history, to this important stratum of this history. And there was a kind of almost an insurgency. People wanted, having realized what had happened, to find out more and more about it and re-establish the entire history.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning. First of all, thanks a lot for this wonderful journey you took us on this morning. So there are so many wonderful bits in this film, to say nothing about the topic itself, the importance of the topic. But for me, what especially stood out was the form. So could you please elaborate on that and speak at what stage did you come up with this form and generally speak about this process? Thank you.
Thank you. Journey, alors français ou anglais?
I'm going to answer probably in French.
Let's try English. Journey is really the word in all the senses, because it's also a journey for me. But I have to begin by the fact that the first form, the first shape I had in mind with this film was a fiction. Vous avez la traduction en français?
Oui.
Okay. Was a fiction. When this announce, a bit surrealistic announce made by Emmanuel Macron was made in 2017, I could not ever imagine, of course, that some artifacts would return concretely. That I thought it was going to happen in 20, 30, 40 years, and so as I didn't know if I was going to witness this in my life, I decided to write I projected to write a fiction that would begin from. Je vais continuer en français. Ce sera beaucoup plus simple.
I'm going to continue in French, it might be more straightforward. So as I was saying, I decided to write a feature film initially, in a sense, or at least have a fictional strand based on one artifact, a mask in fact, and that would follow its entire trajectory, travelling all the way back to our country from France. And I could only really imagine it in the future because in tangible terms, my imagination just wasn't conditioned to be able to imagine that this would be possible. In fact, my imaginary had been set up in such a way that I couldn't even envisage that return of these goods might be possible. That's what I was trying to say at the start of this press conference. That echoes with this vagueness that we heard about a moment from Gildas when he was talking about not knowing in detail about one's history. That is something that means that things don't change as well.
Ça demande de casser énormément de barrières intérieures.
You have to crash through and fracture a whole host of internal barriers if you're going to dare to dream, if you're going to dare to demand what is really just and legitimate. So coming back to your question, this featural strand that, as part of the form, was very central. So when there was finally this announcement that 26 works of art were to be returned, 26 artifacts were to be given back, I decided to seize that moment, which seemed to me to be incredibly important. Although I hadn't realized immediately that 26 works was really not very much at all, given the quantity of works that had been stolen and that need to be returned. When we set off on this extraordinary adventure of accompanying the works back to Benin, in particular with my cinematographer, Joséphine Truyn-Vialard.
On a suivi ses œuvres.
We really followed those works back to Benin from France.
Mot d'ordre, si je puis dire, le principe formel, le principe esthétique, le principe plastique.
The formal aesthetic and ethical principle was to film this return from the perspective of the works, from an African perspective thus.
De les rendre sujettes, narratrices.
And my idea was to turn them into subjects, into agents involved in narrating their own story. That is the fundamental formal principle underpinning this film. Subsequently, there was this debate, and that, for me, is really part of moving beyond just the journey, just the trajectory. First of all, I was thinking just of the trajectory from the Quai Branly Museum back to Cotonou, but when I realized that it was going to be a feature-length documentary and that I wanted to make a broader film, I started to think about young people, about the way in which young people relate to these works, which do, after all, constitute their historic past, their ancestral roots. They represent all of that quite remarkable history and the force of that history, which has not been passed on to them as it ought to have been. So I wanted that subject matter to be clarified as well. I wanted to turn a spotlight on that, all of the issues that arise with this restitution process, issues that relate to the past, that relate to colonization, and the traces that colonialization has left in the present day as well. So the form of the film has these two aspects. There's an encounter between the point of view of the works and that of the young people. Today, it really is an encounter between those two different aspects.
Hi, question here from Brazil. My name is Rodrigo Fonseca from C7 and Correio da Manhã. I would like to hear you about Wally Badaru, the musician that works in the film. Could you say something about the music and his compositions?
Wally Badaru is a journalist asked me about the music in the film and said that the music made him think of David Lynch soundtracks, Angelo Badalamenti. And I was glad because I'm a huge fan of David Lynch, and his work has a great influence on my work. And I told myself that Wally Badaru was kind of in Africa, or Giorgio Moroder, or Badalamenti's African. Enfin, c'est un peu l'équivalence, mais c'est nos Badalamenti.
I have to say, he's a real star for us, and I must say once again,
moi, j'ai été principalement nourrie de cinéma européen, américain.
I've mainly watched American and European films, African films as well, of course, and Asian as well, but I have to say that this film meant that I really had to look back. And I'm talking about looking back not just through these works and looking at their return to their country, and it's not just about meeting these young people either, it's about more than that. The idea was to bring together all of these different aspects, everything that could express the force and the power, and indeed the singularity in cultural terms. All of those aspects of our history were very important. Wally Badaru, I certainly could talk about his background. He is well known, but I'm pleased that this fantastical element of the film was created to a large extent by the contribution of an African musician. He embodies this idea of the hybrid of hybridity, which I embody as well.
Et je me suis vraiment beaucoup appuyée, nourrie, ancrée dans la.
I really drew a great deal on the lyricism, this extraordinary mixture of influences in his music as well. It was a real source of inspiration for me, and it was wonderful to be able to express all of this wealth. The idea of creolization was crucial as well. Everything mixed together, and that was expressed in his music, and I was glad to be able to put that forward in terms of the music rather than in terms of words which do limit things. And I'm glad that this fantastical element was added by an African artist.
Parce que je pense qu'on n'a rien à envier aux grands maîtres de la musique.
I think our music is just as wonderful as that of Western music. And I think the points of reference in the film are important too. Didier, for example, one of the people in the discussion, recalls that if he's to be taken seriously, people expect him to quote Aristotle and Plato. If he refers to African philosophers, he's not taken so seriously. They're held to be minor. And it was, of course, crucial for me that we hear the voices of all these people, also people who are French but have a background from Benin and so on and so forth, backgrounds a bit like mine as well. It was very important to me that they accompanied the return of these treasures. It's much more than just the words that Mackenzie Orsel and I had come up with. It's the whole sense of all these different layers, these different strata. There's an aesthetic element, there's a historic part as well, because, of course, Wally Badarou's background and music also has historical elements. That was quite a long answer.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi there, Philip Alterman from The Guardian newspaper in the UK. One of the questions that your film raises or discusses is whether the return of these 27 objects was a really significant step, or whether it was a patronizing gesture, an insult, as one of the characters says. And I would really like to hear from you, Matti, what your view is on whether you think this is this is significant, or it's 26 out of 7,000 is not enough. Whether you've been in the process, whether you expect, whether you'd call on the government to act faster, and whether you have concerns that maybe the next government after the Macron government may stop this sort of movement of return of objects altogether.
Évidemment que même si c'était important d'accorder le plus grand soin
it was very important
et la plus grande écoute,
to listen as carefully as possible to each of the works and to also treat them with great care, these objects that returned to Benin. It's quite clear that they were way too few, particularly compared with the 7,000 works that are held captive in these museums, particularly at the Quai Branly. That point was made very well in the discussion. These 26 works are good, but it's not enough, and I certainly think that it is humiliating.
Mais je pense qu'il faut aller au-delà de
I would say that we need to move beyond that.
Et de la tout le travail de communication.
We need to think about more than just the way in which this was staged and all of the governmental communication about this process.
apprendre à appréhender à différents.
We're well aware that this issue needs to be addressed on different levels. There's a political agenda, certainly, and the politicians have their own script here. But then at the same time, there's the way in which others respond. Artists, filmmakers, students. There's the question of how we choose to tackle this issue. We shouldn't play down how very powerful these tools can be that we have at our disposal, specifically cinematographic tools.
L'importance de ce que rendre des œuvres à un territoire qu'on a
That's a way to really
exploité, dominé et qui continue.
Do something important. It's an important step to hand back these works to a part of the world that we have exploited for centuries. The France has exploited this place for centuries, and we realize that we have to return these artifacts. When we realize that only 26 out of 7,000 have been returned, of course, that doesn't say much. You need to do more. You need to go further.
En l'occurrence, c'est ce que j'ai voulu faire à travers ce film.
You need to breathe new life into this question. That's what I was trying to do with this film. We need to look at restitution in the very broad sense of the term.
Un prisme à travers lequel questionner.
It can be a kind of pretext, a way of getting a handle on everything that's problematic in these power balance and power struggle, everything that needs to be returned. We talk about returns, restitution.
Je pense le dispositif du film.
And that is really the structure of the film. We're talking about restitution, about return, as a way to highlight all of the issues that it triggers, all of the questions that come bubbling up as a result. And we need to do that as carefully and as rigorously as we possibly can. We need to be really as serious as we can about this. It's much too easy for France to simply say, oh, we'll send 26 artifacts to Benin, and that's that. And nobody's fooled by that. We're not fooled by it, and you are not fooled by it either. Everyone is playing their roles. Everyone has their own agenda. Everyone has their own staging as well.
Donc évidemment que c'est insuffisant 26, mais
so of course 26 works isn't enough.
Il faut le dire, mais
we need to say that.
Mais justement
it does have to be said.
J'ai vraiment voulu à travers Habib, Joséa, Gildas et tous les jeunes que j'ai pris.
But through all of these young people who I met and brought together around this project, through all of them I wanted to move beyond that specific question, which is of course important.
De s'emparer, il faut vraiment que nous nous emparions de ces.
But you really need to get to grips with it, and we need to really take possession of our own history.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. One here.
Haris Sagid, African Refugee News. First of all, thank you, because this is really a very interesting documentary. Well done.
Thank you.
But there are a few things that, we say France, we say Italy, because it's not only France, but they preserved our things. You know what happened in Iraq, what happened in Syria, what happened in Afghanistan with the big. So we have to also to say thanks to the museum, not to the government, but to the museum. There is also another film at the Berlinale. It's called Open Grave. And this Open Grave is about the skulls. And they are in Berlin. And I went to see, and they are in underground, closed. And I said, oh, where is my heritage here? Mm. You know, this is a good thing that the Berlinale brought this film. What I wanted to know, what were your challenges to do this? Because you're not African, but
I am African.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. I said not African.
I am African.
You lived.
I'm French Senegalese.
Oh, Sorry, I'm very sorry
And it
for
doesn't.
that. But no, well, I don't read about.
It's fine.
But how did you get in? Because it's really profound. I didn't like the people speaking French. I wanted them to speak in their own language during the conversation, the students, because it was more better. But now I know why. Thank you.
No, but sorry, can I also interject a little bit? I mean, I think there was also precisely that debate also at the university where they discussed that, no? About the question of language and colonialism. So, but yeah, I'll let
Yeah, let's take this angle, the language, because it's might be the most important one if we talk about restitution. I don't have the translation in my ear anymore, but I think in the debate, you don't speak fond, which is a question that was central for me, because it's actually the first film I make in Africa where the protagonists don't speak their original language and speak French. So for me, it was actually first experience. So Gildas, who assisted me on the film, who is a filmmaker as well, knew that it was very important for me to gather young people around this debate, preferably in fond. But then I discovered, even though it's unfortunately not a surprise, that à l'intérieur, inside these kind of spaces, university, administration, the language spoken is the language of the ancient colonizers. And like a young woman called Rose says in the film, that her own language has not been transmitted to her in order for her to express herself as she would like to in her own language. But this is why the fond spoken by the treasures in the film was an absolute evidence for me, because once again, in terms of when it comes to restitution, I think the language, the original language, is one of the main it's one of the main.
Well, it's constitutes. It's one of the main points. You know, I mean, that's the part of the problem. You know, I mean, through colonialism, through the looting. Like they didn't just loot objects. Like they literally took cultures of religion.
Exactly.
You know, and also film.
But I find it almost as politically impacting to hear them talk French and being absolutely aware that they should probably be speaking their own language instead. But I think that makes a very dynamic conversation between the ancient fond that the treasures are coming back with, discovering these young people fighting about the loss of their history in French.
Thank you. Yes.
Claudia Schulmerich, Frankfurt, Weltexpresso.
I come from Weltexpresso, Frankfurt. Now, unlike you, for me, as a German, I grew up with the term restitution. The Nazis plundered so much. I guess you perhaps need to choose the right channel.
Sorry, I lost the translation. I don't have the translation in French.
Nee, wirklich nicht.
I don't speak a word of German.
Test, test.
Ja,
Merci, c'est bon.
also Claudia Schulmerich, das ist jetzt nicht so wichtig, aber im Gegensatz zu Ihnen
So,
habe ich,
I was saying, unlike you,
bin ich mit dem Begriff Restitution groß
I'm
geworden.
German and I grew up with the term restitution. That's because the Nazis stole so much from Jewish people and from other people. They stole so much from all kinds of people. So that term restitution was there for me right from the very beginning. But it's a different kind of restitution, because in those days it was individual property that was stolen rather than national property. And that's a very important issue. There's different moral issues involved. The question is it better to have an image, a painting in a museum so that everyone can see it, or is it better to give it back to the heirs? That's the question for people getting restitution from Germany, I would say. But I would like to stick to your term, restitution to nations, to peoples. How far back should it go? I'm an archaeologist, and I ask from that point of view. For example, in the museum in Vienna, there's Moctezuma's feather amulet, and Mexico quite rightly says that they would like to have it back. Colonialism is a kind of boundary in history when it's quite clear that people had their artifacts stolen from them. But as an archaeologist, let me ask, what about Greece? What about Rome? It's really a question of money that determines who has the originals. In America, there are a lot of Greek antiquities, originals. Should they be restituted and returned or not? So where is there a cut-off point? Where is there a boundary where it's clear that people are entitled to have their goods, their cultural goods, back again?
Jusqu'où aller,
How far back should it go?
C'est une question, mais comme rien n'est rendu.
That's certainly a question, but as nothing is restituted, or scarcely, certainly when it comes to Africa, that's what we were looking at in this film. This was the first major restitution of our century, and so I must say it's hard for me to start worrying about how far to go when it has scarcely begun, and the very first restitution is already on a very small scale to such a degree that it is problematic.
Ce que je trouve surtout intéressant, c'est toutes les nouvelles questions que
What I find interesting above all are all of the new questions that arise with this restitution. That's what is of the greatest interest to me.
C'est la question que j'avais vraiment à cœur de poser.
In the discussion, it was the question I really wanted to have raised, but it's one that's just touched upon in that debate. There are new questions that come bubbling up.
Nous apporte comme terrain de
There's new terrain that we have to explore and question.
Je cherche un terme très simple, mais comment est-ce que...
Trying to put this as straightforwardly as possible, but how is it possible to reintegrate this legacy, this heritage, into the heart of our contemporary cultures? What kind of link can we reinvent between these works and the younger generation? Questions put very straightforwardly in the film. The idea of museums is a Western concept. We shouldn't call them into question just because they are Western, but we also need to reconceive this through the prism of the African paradigm. That's a fascinating question as well. If you finally start thinking about how it's possible to invent the museum space today from an African perspective, this also actually resonates with what we see in the university debate in the film. People are calling into question what the university is proposing nowadays as well. It could be a post-university era where the relationship is no longer such a vertical one when it's about transmitting knowledge and reception of that knowledge. At the heart of the debate, nobody's thinking yet about the future of museums. Of course, that's not a new issue for people who've been thinking about it for some time, but for you, for me, and the university as well has also been put in the dock, and it becomes a space that needs to be reinvented as well. It's about reinventing the entire functioning of a university, what its primary role should be. It is, after all, there to debate, to call into question, to reappropriate one's history. I'm somewhat drifting away from your initial question because that is certainly an important topic. But it has to be said, the question of how far to go, given that at long last, for us at least, this topic is being addressed. I mean, it's not just re-emerging, but it's being given expression through the return of these 26 works to Benin. There are a lot of other questions that arise. Before we start thinking about how far we should go, we need to continue with the process. And we need to accompany the process with all the requisite reflections. Really mulling over what restitution means, and we need to move beyond the question of how much we should give back, whether we should give back works, etc., etc. It's really about asking the very important political questions. There are urgent political issues that have to be raised.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Carlos Grau from Spain for Cultural Resuena. I have two questions, but I make it shorter. The first one was for Mati, but I'm going to do it for the rest because he was addressed most of the questions. It's a metaphysical question. It's about where belongs the identity. What do you think? Because museums are a physical place, but I think the movie asks a lot about if they don't belong to museums, where? And we see the ocean. So maybe this statue of Benin doesn't belong to a museum. When the lights goes off, it's like sad because it says, okay, darkness comes again. So what do you think that these objects represent and where identity belongs, if not to a material place, to a metaphysical one? Thank you.
You're asking the question? Okay. No.
Ces œuvres en sont en quelque sorte représentent pour nous.
These works, in a sense, represent the soul of the people of Benin.
Ça nous reconnaît et ça nous invite également à interroger toute notre histoire.
It reconnects us with our history, but it also invites us to call that history into question. They come from a specific community, but at a particular point in time they were taken, but now they have returned. And after that point in time, they don't belong to one small community, they belong to the entire community of Benin.
C'est-à-dire les loger dans une case ou quelque part comme ça.
And whether they're placed in a display case or somewhere else, they'll be closed in a sense. We can't say they'll stay there forever. They take on a different dimension. They assume a metaphysical dimension, which sparks a series of questions. There's the issue of spirituality and our soul, what's happening with the very depths of that soul. From that perspective, we can ask the right questions. Young people need to take up the gauntlet, go out looking for their history in its entirety and all its facets. Let me add something. Over and above the tangible, physical dimension embodied in these works, there is, of course, also a metaphysical dimension, as you said.
aujourd'hui, il y a tout un peuple. Ce n'est plus seulement le peuple le peuple fond.
We're thinking about the whole of the people of Benin. It's not just the Fon people. During the Kingdom of Dahomey, it's the whole of Benin now, so it's more than solely the Fon community. It's the entire community now reappropriating these artifacts. So we can't hand it back just to the Fon community, but to the whole of Benin. Access to these 26 works is crucial. We allow all of the people of Benin to have access to them. All of these people who say that they have that identity, we allow them to have access to those works, to touch them when possible, if it is possible, and to have a contact with that history, because they didn't know about that history before these works were returned. We need to make clear, as Matti said a moment ago, these 26 works are really just a starting point. Many people had no idea whatsoever. They didn't know that there were works that had been pillaged. When it was announced that they were returning, a debate was kicked off. People said, oh really? Nobody told us about that, even people who had been to school, because the educational system that we have doesn't teach us about our own history. Although it gives us a little bit of our history, but it teaches it from a Western point of view. That system wiped out everything that made us proud and made us great. We're told that our ancestors were really frivolous people. We are taught that they were dealers and so on. And nowadays, we have to start talking really about who we were and who our ancestors were. And you saw that in the discussion in the university as well. You'll see that a lot of people were saying, well, if there's 7,000 works abroad now, we're being given 26 back. Now we have to fight to have the other works returned as well. And we need to underscore how exceptional these works are. They're quite out of the ordinary. They're really outstanding pieces. And we said, well, our ancestors were real geniuses. They were fantastic. The artwork is really high quality. And if you have these 26 who are amazing, just imagine 7,000. So it's a real challenge for us now to have all the 7,000 come back to Benin. We need to ensure that it's possible for us to preserve them so that future generations will be able to see them and to keep them well preserved. And just to add something along the same lines as well, it goes beyond just the physical level. At some point, people asked about our culture and about the language, and I think there's something particular about this film, that it puts young people at its heart, and we see that young people need to become aware. They need to have their consciousness raised. We need to move beyond that. Include the local languages in our education. So it's not just the physical and the metaphysical, it really hits the nail on the head. We need to think about how education happens, how our culture is mediated and our languages in Benin and indeed across Africa.
Thank you. Final question.
Bonjour, merci.
Good morning. There's another important figure as well here. There's the Atlantic, and you film it in a way that's rather similar to your previous film, but it also appeared in the films before that as well, Atlantics with an S. So there is the Atlantic Ocean. It does perhaps play a central part in your work more generally. Is it one of the key figures in your work, would you say?
Il y a à la fois une raison très concrète
well, there's one very tangible reason.
Qui fait que je ne pouvais pas ne pas filmer.
And one very clear reason why I absolutely had to include that specific shot.
Alors il y a eu deux points de déportation.
There were two deportations. There was Ouida, was one, and that's the wharf in Cotonou where you can still see the vestiges of the dock, the platform, from which people were deported by boat. Men and women were taken away from our country. Béhanzin left from Ouida or from Cotonou, do you know? From Wharf. From that wharf. Yeah, there's a disagreement here. No, from Ouida. But I remember, and I will indeed always remember, when we went location scouting, and there we were by the sea in Cotonou. I went with Gildas and another friend. And Gildas, I do remember that you were really angry. You remember that? Because when we were there, you really realized we were there in the middle of the night, doing our location scouting along the edge of the ocean, and you realize that that place and everything it represents historically and politically, the reality of that place was something that had been taken away from you and concealed from you. It was a very striking moment for me as well. When I was there, when I could see the tangible traces of that deportation, to be right there on the spot, choosing to go there and choosing to film almost seemed to recall to you what the situation was like. You felt there'd been a dematerialization previously of history. It had been rendered non-tangible previously, as I said earlier. I mean, for myself, personally speaking, I'd say that the films that I choose to make make it possible for me to reinscribe myself within my own history and to become aware of the violence of that history. I don't think there's any other way to really grasp the full extent of that other than by choosing to make the films that I do choose to make. Colonialism and the way in which it rendered its deeds abstract, downplaying them, completely inverting. How should I put this? Putting its narrative, its screenplay in the limelight. Telling things from its perspective, from its Western perspective, is really a project and an undertaking that did work. It's worked right up until now. The political, social and psychological traces of those go very deep as well. And if you want to break away from that and to break free of that fiction and overcome the alienation of this narrative, which is an entirely dominant narrative to date. And if we want to break away from that, I think we need to go very, very deep in order to find the requisite resources so that we can take possession of our own history and reappropriate it by drawing on the reality of oppression and also by drawing on the reality of having an African heritage, being Afro-descendant, so that you can really experience the tangible traces of colonialism.
Mais l'affranchissement, il devient de plus en plus palpable.
But this sense of breaking free of that narrative, something that becomes increasingly palpable, increasingly tangible, and you can really feel the ramifications of this awakening. It's a grand awakening, I would say, and this debate is part and parcel of that. Thinking back to the films that I made in 2008, 2009,
très différent.
In a very different setting from Benin and Cotonou. I was in Dakar.
Où j'ai choisi de filmer un jeune homme qui.
And I chose to film a young man.
Sa tentative de migrer.
He'd attempted to migrate to Europe, and Spain had forced him to return. And there was just one thing that he wanted. All he wanted was to set off again, to escape Senegal. At the time, that did not give him any prospects whatsoever to realize his dreams and live a fulfilled life. And over above those very tangible economic reasons that pushed him to leave Senegal. And let me say, by the way, just as an aside, that young people are still taking these wooden canoes to migrate to Spain. That is still a phenomenon that is still at play today. It's still happening. And I really had a sense of the way in which the Western way of thinking had got a grip on his mind, on his psychology, and how powerful that was. In a period of 10, 15 years, it's not exactly the same places, but I realized that in that period of 10 to 15 years, I feel that I can breathe more freely when I go to those places. That kind of grasp of people's way of thinking is no longer functioning, it's no longer operational. And I've had to free myself as well from being under that influence. Of course, we don't live in the same corners of the world, but it's the same influence. You experience it from Africa, I experience it in Paris, as somebody with African roots, with an African background, but through the films that I choose to make, and through the voices that are heard in those films, I think it really is a vital process of reappropriation and of breaking free of that grip on our mindsets. And I'm very pleased that through Dahomey, you can feel this tipping point. It's an irreversible tipping point. That's for certain.
Thank you. That's actually a beautiful way to end. Thank you. Thank you.
Merci.
Yeah. We could go on and on, but unfortunately we have to end it here. So thank you so much for being here. Wow.